Pablo Emilio Escobar Gaviria was born on the 1st of December 1949 in the quiet town of Rio Negro in Colombia's Antioquia department. He belonged to the Paisa community, a regional group known for its distinct culture and accent. His family traced its origins back to Spain's Basque country, and through distant relatives also carried Italian roots. He was the third of 7 children, raised in modest surroundings, and later moved with his family to Medellin, a growing city where opportunity and poverty lived side by side. His father, Abel de Jesus Escobar, worked as a small farmer, while his mother, Hermilda Gaviria, earned a living as a schoolteacher. Money was scarce, and their home was simple, but education and discipline were encouraged. In 1966, just before turning 17, Pablo left high school. 2 years later, he returned to school, along with his cousin, Gustavo Gaviria. By then, the streets of Medellin had already toughened them, and teachers often saw them as troublemakers rather than students. Despite their attempt to continue, both eventually dropped out again after a year. Even so, Escobar did not completely abandon education. He forged a high school diploma and briefly attended college, hoping to study criminal law. His ambitions at the time were surprisingly formal. He imagined himself becoming a lawyer, then a politician, and one day, president of Colombia. But financial difficulties forced him to give up his studies before any degree could be completed. After leaving school for the final time, Pablo Escobar slowly drifted deeper into the world of petty crime. One of his earliest activities, along with a small group of companions, was stealing tombstones from cemeteries. They would remove the inscriptions using sandblasting tools, and then resell the gravestones on the black market to funeral homes or stone suppliers who asked few questions. As time went on, Escobar began spending more time with local street gangs. He moved from gravestones to stealing cars, helping to dismantle, modify, and resell them for profit. What began as small, non-violent schemes gradually turned into more serious crime. Escobar's operations expanded, and with them, the methods hardened. He began hiring criminals to kidnap individuals who owed him money, demanding ransom payments from their families. On some occasions, even after receiving the ransom, he would destroy the ransom note or refuse proof of payment, turning what should have been a negotiation into a warning. One of the most well-known of these early crimes took place in 1971, when Escobar's group kidnapped businessman Diego Echevarria. Despite the payment of a $50,000 ransom, Echevarria was killed. The case drew significant public attention and made Escobar's gang widely recognized, not for wealth or political influence yet, but for its growing reputation in Medellin's criminal world. By the mid-1970s, Pablo Escobar had already spent nearly a decade involved in organized crime, moving quietly through smuggling, theft, and small-scale trafficking. Around this time, cocaine began to emerge as a major export from Colombia, gradually replacing older contraband industries. Escobar entered the trade early and grew rapidly. His growing operations soon drew attention from the Colombian Security Service, DAS. In May 1976, after returning from a drug run to Ecuador, Escobar was arrested by DAS agents who discovered 39 kilograms of cocaine hidden inside the spare tire of his vehicle. Legal proceedings began, but Escobar managed to replace the first judge assigned to the case and then successfully bribed the second judge, resulting in his release along with his associates. The following year, the DAS agent who had arrested him was killed, marking one of the earliest known acts of retaliation tied to his organization. From this point forward, Escobar relied on a simple and effective strategy when dealing with law enforcement and politicians: plata o plomo, silver or lead. It meant individuals could accept money and cooperate, or refuse and face violence. This method allowed him to bribe some officials while frightening others into silence. Both the Medellin cartel and the Cali cartel adopted similar approaches, offering financial support to candidates from both major political parties, the liberal and conservative parties. Over time, many of the politicians who received funding from drug traffickers were elected, giving figures like Escobar influence across different levels of government. Although the Medellin cartel had begun forming in the early 1970s, it expanded significantly after a meeting between Escobar and other traffickers at a farm in April 1978. By the end of that year, the group had successfully smuggled approximately 19,000 kilograms of cocaine into the United States, marking the beginning of its large-scale international operations. As cocaine demand in the United States grew rapidly during the late 1970s, Pablo Escobar responded by expanding his trafficking operations. He began organizing more frequent smuggling routes and wider distribution networks that moved cocaine into places such as South Florida, California, and Puerto Rico, as well as other regions across the country. During this time, Escobar worked closely with Carlos Later, a fellow drug trafficker and co-founder of what would later be known as the Medellin cartel. Together, they helped develop a new transshipment hub on Norman's Cay, a small island in the Bahamas located about 350 kilometers, or roughly 220 miles southeast of the Florida coast. According to reports, Escobar and financier Robert Vesco acquired much of the land on Norman's Cay. The island was gradually turned into a fully functioning smuggling base, complete with a runway long enough for drug planes to land and depart, modest housing, a small harbor, aircraft, boats, and even a refrigerated warehouse that was used to store cocaine temporarily before it was flown into the United States. However, Escobar's brother, Roberto Escobar, later claimed that Pablo himself did not purchase Norman's Cay, and that the island was primarily a personal venture of Carlos Later. Between 1978 and 1982, Norman's Cay served as one of the main trafficking corridors for the Medellin organization. The profits from this route were enormous. Using the wealth he accumulated during this period, Escobar purchased approximately 20 square kilometers of land in the department of Antioquia for several $1 million. On this land, he built his well-known estate, Hacienda Nápoles. The property included a large house, a private zoo filled with exotic animals, an artificial lake, a sculpture garden, a bullfighting ring, and various amenities designed both for his family and for guests within his inner circle. It became one of the most visible symbols of Escobar's wealth and influence. At the height of his power, Pablo Escobar presented two different faces to Colombia. On one hand, he became known for his charitable work. He funded housing projects, parks, football fields, small hospitals, schools, and churches in some of the poorest neighborhoods of Medellin. Many people believed his efforts improved their lives in ways the government never had. For this reason, he was often called the Paisa Robin Hood. It was during this time that Escobar claimed in an interview that his fortune began from a small bicycle rental business he had supposedly started at the age of 16. As his influence grew, Escobar also chose to enter politics. In the early 1980s, he supported and participated in Colombia's Liberal Party. In 1982, he secured a position as an alternate member of the Colombian Congress. Even though it was a secondary role, the position granted him certain legal privileges, including parliamentary immunity and the right to a diplomatic passport. This made him more visible to the public and, for a short time, allowed him to appear as a legitimate political figure. However, his political career did not go unchallenged. The newly appointed Minister of Justice, Rodrigo Lara Bonilla, began publicly accusing Escobar of criminal activities from the moment Congress opened. Lara's team investigated Escobar's 1976 drug trafficking arrest, which had previously been dismissed. Around the same period, prominent Liberal Party leader Luis Carlos Galán expelled Escobar from the party. Escobar attempted to defend himself, but the political environment became increasingly hostile. In January 1984, he announced he was withdrawing from politics. 3 months later, Rodrigo Lara Bonilla was assassinated. The order to kill him was traced back to Escobar. After this point, Escobar turned his attention toward Colombia's judiciary. Throughout the mid-1980s, he bribed or intimidated judges, and those who refused him sometimes faced violence. In 1985, while he was wanted by authorities, Escobar offered to surrender to the Colombian government on the condition that he would not be extradited to the United States. The government initially rejected this proposal. In response, Escobar and several other traffickers created a group called Los Extraditables, whose purpose was to pressure the state into banning extradition. Members of this group issued threats and ran newspaper advertisements with their slogan, "We prefer a grave in Colombia to a cell in the United States." Los Extraditables were later linked to attempts to prevent the Colombian Supreme Court from reviewing the country's extradition treaty with the United States. They also gave indirect support to the left-wing guerrilla group that attacked the Palace of Justice in Bogotá on the 6th of November 1985, an event in which nearly half of the Supreme Court justices were killed. The following year, in 1986, the Supreme Court declared the extradition treaty invalid because it had been signed by a presidential delegation rather than the president himself. Although this was seen as a temporary victory for Escobar, it did not last. The new Colombian president, Virgilio Barco Vargas, later restored cooperation with the United States on extradition matters. Escobar still carried resentment against Luis Carlos Galán for removing him from the political party. On August 18, 1989, Galán, who was then running for president, was assassinated on Escobar's orders. Not long after, Escobar attempted to assassinate Galán's political successor, César Gaviria Trujillo, by planting a bomb on Avianca Flight 203. The aircraft exploded on 27 November 1989, killing all 107 people on board. Gaviria had not boarded the plane and survived because 2 American citizens were among the victims. The United States government began to intervene more directly in efforts against Escobar. After the assassination of Luis Carlos Galán, the Colombian government under President César Gaviria began to act more decisively against Pablo Escobar and the drug cartels. Escobar responded with a campaign of violence to pressure authorities and influence public opinion. However, the ongoing instability eventually led the government to negotiate with him. A deal was made. If Escobar surrendered, ended his criminal activities, and accepted imprisonment, he would receive a reduced sentence, along with certain privileges in custody. In 1991, Escobar agreed to this arrangement and turned himself in to Colombian authorities. His timing was deliberate. Shortly before his surrender, a new Colombian constitution had been approved, which prohibited the extradition of Colombian citizens to the United States. Many people believe that Escobar and other drug traffickers had influenced members of the Constituent Assembly to approve this change, though it was never officially proven. For Escobar, it meant he could serve time in Colombia and avoid being sent to an American prison. Instead of being placed in an ordinary jail, Escobar was confined in a private facility he had arranged himself, known as La Catedral. Although officially a prison, it contained comforts unusual for detention. The compound included a football field, a bar, a jacuzzi, a waterfall, and even a large dollhouse-like structure. Escobar lived there with selected associates and maintained control over who could enter or leave. Over time, reports began to emerge that Escobar was continuing his criminal activities from within La Catedral. Journalists and government officials claimed that he was still managing parts of his drug network and even ordering killings. These accusations grew stronger and led the Colombian government to secretly plan his transfer to a standard prison facility. On the 22nd of July, 1992, authorities attempted to move Escobar from La Catedral. However, he had already learned of their intentions. Using his connections inside the prison and within local law enforcement, he escaped before the transfer could take place. From that moment onward, Pablo Escobar became a fugitive again and spent the remainder of his life avoiding capture by the police and military. In the final years of his life, Pablo Escobar was pursued by multiple enemies at once. The Colombian police, supported by the United States government, were actively searching for him, and his former associates in the Cali cartel had also turned against him. By this time, Escobar no longer controlled the vast network he once did, and he was constantly moving between safe houses to avoid detection. On the 2nd of December 1993, authorities finally managed to locate him in a modest house in a middle-class neighborhood in Medellin. His position was traced after he made a phone call to his family, and the signal was detected using equipment and intelligence assistance provided by the United States. Colombian special forces surrounded the building and attempted to apprehend him. The situation quickly turned into an exchange of gunfire. Escobar tried to flee by climbing onto the roof of the building, but he was shot and killed during the attempt. A member of his security detail was also killed. Escobar was struck by bullets in the torso and legs, and one bullet hit him in the head, resulting in his death. There has been ongoing debate about whether he died from police gunfire, or whether he may have taken his own life to avoid capture. However, the official report stated that he was killed during the operation. After Pablo Escobar's death and the breakup of the Medellin cartel, control of the cocaine trade shifted to the rival Cali cartel, which became the dominant trafficking organization throughout the early and mid-1990s. This lasted until the Colombian government arrested or killed most of its leaders, effectively weakening its control over the drug market. Despite his violent history, Escobar's Robin Hood image remained strong in certain parts of Medellin. Many of the city's poorest residents, who had benefited from his housing projects, sports fields, donations, and social programs, continued to view him as a protector rather than a criminal. When he died, thousands of people came to say goodbye. It is estimated that more than 25,000 people attended his funeral. Some people went beyond mourning and began to treat Escobar as a kind of folk saint, visiting his grave, leaving messages, or even praying to him for help in difficult times. Pablo Escobar was laid to rest in the Monte Sacro Cemetery in Itagüí, near Medellin. Though his cartel collapsed and Colombia moved forward, his memory remained deeply embedded in the city's culture, admired by some, condemned by others, but never forgotten. On the 4th of July, 2006, Virginia Vallejo, a well-known Colombian television news presenter who had been romantically involved with Pablo Escobar between 1983 and 1987, contacted Attorney General Mario Iguarán. She offered to testify in the trial of former Senator Alberto Santofimio, who had been accused of taking part in the conspiracy to assassinate presidential candidate Luis Carlos Galán in 1989. Iguarán confirmed that Vallejo had reached out to his office, but he also explained that the presiding judge had already decided to close the trial on the 9th of July, several weeks earlier than originally planned. As a result, her testimony was not included at the time, and many observers believed the judicial process had been closed prematurely. 2 weeks later, on the 18th of July 2006, Vallejo was flown to the United States on a special Drug Enforcement Administration (DEA) aircraft. The official explanation was that she was taken abroad for her own protection, as her cooperation in high-profile criminal investigations had placed her at risk. A few days after her departure, on 24th July, a video recording was broadcast on Colombian television by RCN. In this recording, Vallejo accused Alberto Santofimio of encouraging Pablo Escobar to order the assassination of Luis Carlos Galán. Around 14 million people watched the broadcast. The public impact of this statement contributed to the reopening of the Galán case. Eventually, on 31st August 2011, Santofimio was found guilty and sentenced to 24 years in prison for his involvement in the crime. Vallejo also spoke about Escobar's alleged role in the 1985 Palace of Justice siege. According to her, Escobar provided financial support to the M19 guerrilla group, which carried out the attack. She claimed that while Escobar funded the operation, the deaths of over 100 people, including 11 Supreme Court justices, guerrilla members, and court employees, were mainly the result of how the Colombian army responded during the siege. Her statements led to the reopening of the case in 2008, and she was invited to testify once again. Many of the events described in her testimony and in her memoir, Amando a Pablo, Odiando a Escobar, Loving Pablo, Hating Escobar, were later confirmed by Colombia's Commission of Truth. As a result of these investigations, a former colonel and a former general were convicted and sentenced to 30 and 35 years in prison, respectively, for the forced disappearance of individuals detained during the siege. Vallejo would later testify in the trial concerning Galán's assassination as well. In her book, she made controversial claims, accusing several political figures, including former Colombian presidents Alfonso López Michelsen, Ernesto Samper, and Álvaro Uribe, of having connections to drug trafficking networks. After Pablo Escobar's death, his family, his widow Maria Victoria Henao, now known as Maria Isabel Santos Caballero, his son Juan Pablo Escobar, who later changed his name to Sebastian Marroquin Santos, and his daughter Manuela left Colombia in 1995. They requested asylum in multiple countries but were refused. Despite Escobar's infidelities during their marriage, Maria remained loyal to him and never abandoned him. Members of the Cali cartel reportedly played recordings of her phone calls with Escobar to their own wives, saying she represented how a loyal spouse should behave. This attitude, along with negotiations, helped protect her life and the lives of her children after Escobar's death. However, the Cali cartel demanded large payments as compensation for Escobar's war against them. Maria later negotiated directly with them to spare her son's life, personally promising that he would neither seek revenge nor return to the drug trade. Unable to remain in Colombia, the family fled first to Mozambique, then to Brazil, and eventually settled in Argentina under assumed names. Living as Maria Isabel Santos, Escobar's widow established herself as a real estate businesswoman in Buenos Aires. However, when one of her business partners discovered her true identity, she was reported to authorities. She was arrested and spent 18 months in prison while investigators examined her finances. She was eventually released after authorities could not prove that her money came from illegal sources. Later, her son explained in interviews that his mother loved Escobar because of his charm, generosity, and the compassion he appeared to show toward the poor. Maria Victoria Henao, now Maria Isabel Santos, continues to live in Buenos Aires with her 2 children. On the 5th of June 2018, she and her son Sebastian were charged by an Argentine federal judge, Nestor Barral, with money laundering in connection with 2 Colombian drug traffickers. The court ordered that approximately $1 million of assets be seized from each of them. Sebastian Marroquin, formerly Juan Pablo Escobar, became openly critical of his father's actions. In 2009, Argentine filmmaker Nicolas Entel released a documentary titled Sins of My Father, which followed Marroquin as he sought forgiveness from the sons of 2 of Escobar's most prominent victims, Justice Minister Rodrigo Lara Bonilla and presidential candidate Luis Carlos Galan. The film was shown at the 2010 Sundance Film Festival and aired on HBO later that year. In 2014, Marroquin published a memoir titled Pablo Escobar, My Father, written under his birth name. The book aimed to provide a personal account of Escobar's life, correct false stories, and show how his death broke apart the family. Escobar's sister, Luz Maria Escobar, also tried to make amends. She spoke publicly, wrote letters to families of victims, and helped organize a public memorial on the 20th anniversary of her brother's death. On the 28th of October 2006, some family members requested that Escobar's body be exhumed from his grave at Monte Sacro Cemetery to confirm his identity via DNA testing due to a paternity claim. The process was filmed and later shown on television by RCN. This angered Sebastian Marroquin, who accused his uncle Roberto Escobar and cousin Nicolas Escobar of exploiting the dead by allowing the footage to be broadcast. After Escobar's death, his estate, Hacienda Nápoles, including its zoo, ranch, and buildings, was seized by the government under the Extinción de Dominio, domain extinction law, The property was later transformed into a theme park, with 4 nearby luxury hotels overlooking what remains of the zoo and grounds. In 2014, Escobar's brother, Roberto Escobar, together with businessman Olaf K. Gustafsson, founded Escobar Inc. in the United States. They registered the legal successor in interest rights to Pablo Escobar's name and likeness in the state of California. During his lifetime, Pablo Escobar kept a variety of exotic animals at his estate, Hacienda Nápoles, including elephants, giraffes, and 4 hippopotamuses that he brought from Africa. After his death, most of the animals were relocated to zoos, but the hippos were left behind. They were considered too large and difficult to transport safely, and so they remained on the abandoned property, where they continued to live freely. With no one managing the land, the hippos began to breed. By 2007, their numbers had increased from the original 4 to approximately 16. They started to wander outside the former estate, especially toward water sources such as the Magdalena River, where they searched for food. In 2009, 3 hippos, 2 adults, and 1 young calf left the main group and began roaming in nearby areas. After reports that they had caused damage to farmland, killed cattle, and behaved aggressively toward local residents, the authorities authorized a hunt. One of the adult hippos, known locally as Pepe, was shot and killed. The event caused widespread public debate in Colombia and internationally. Despite the controversy, the hippo population continued to grow. By 2014, local officials in Puerto Triunfo, in the Antioquia department, estimated that around 40 hippos were living in the region. By 2016, researchers reported that without any form of population control, their numbers could more than double within the next decade. Some scientists believed the animals were becoming an invasive species, while others argued they should be protected. The unusual situation drew international attention. The National Geographic Channel produced a documentary titled Cocaine Hippos, focusing on the history of the animals and the environmental issues surrounding them. A report published in a student magazine at Yale University noted that many local environmentalists were calling for the hippos to be protected, although there was no clear plan on how to manage them in the long term. In 2018, National Geographic released another article that highlighted ongoing disagreements among scientists and conservation experts. Some argued that the hippos could disrupt local ecosystems, while others pointed out that they had become a part of the landscape and even supported local tourism. Many residents favored allowing the hippos to remain. By October 2021, the Colombian government began a program to chemically sterilize some of the hippos in an attempt to control the growing population without killing them. The future of Escobar's hippos remains uncertain, but their presence has become one of the most unusual legacies of his life and Hacienda Nápoles. On February 22, 2019, at 11:53 a.m., authorities in Medellin demolished the Edificio Monaco, a 6-story apartment building located in the El Poblado district. The property had once belonged to Pablo Escobar and, according to retired Colombian General Rosso José Serrano, it was a place where Escobar planned some of his most daring operations. Escobar had originally built the residence for his wife and children, but in 1988, it was heavily damaged by a car bomb planted by the rival Cali cartel. After that, the building was abandoned and remained unoccupied for decades. Despite its condition, Edificio Monaco gradually became a tourist attraction for visitors interested in Escobar's life and the history of the Medellin cartel. Many locals, however, felt that the structure served as a reminder of a painful past rather than something to be preserved. The city's mayor at the time, Federico Gutierrez, supported demolishing the building and replacing it with a memorial dedicated to the victims of drug violence. Among them, 4 presidential candidates, hundreds of police officers, and thousands of civilians. The decision was supported by Colombian President Iván Duque, who stated that the demolition symbolized a shift in how history should be remembered. He emphasized that the city should not glorify criminal figures, but instead honor those who suffered and died during the years of cartel violence. The demolition was seen as an effort to show that Medellin had changed and no longer wished to be defined by its past association with drug cartels. In its place, a public park was planned as a tribute to the victims and as a symbol of the city's recovery and transformation. In March 1976, when he was 26 years old, Pablo Escobar married Maria Victoria Henao, who was 15 at the time. Her family opposed the relationship because they believed Escobar was socially inferior and not a suitable partner. Ignoring their objections, the couple eloped. Over the following years, they had 2 children together, Juan Pablo, who later changed his name to Sebastián Marroquín, and Manuela Escobar. In 2007, Colombian journalist Virginia Vallejo published her memoir titled Amando a Pablo, Odiando a Escobar, Loving Pablo, Hating Escobar. In the book, she described her romantic relationship with Escobar, which lasted from 1983 to 1987. She also claimed that he maintained connections with several high-profile politicians, Caribbean dictators, and even former Colombian presidents. Her memoir later inspired the 2017 film Loving Pablo, starring Javier Bardem and Penelope Cruz. Another figure allegedly involved in Escobar's personal life was Griselda Blanco, a well-known drug trafficker. Various stories and diary entries suggest that she and Escobar had a clandestine but intense relationship. In her notes, she referred to Escobar using private nicknames such as Coque de mi Rey, My Coke King, and Pola Blanca, White Rooster. Religion also remained a visible part of Escobar's life. He was raised as a Roman Catholic and continued to identify with the faith throughout his life. A priest named Father Elkin once described Escobar as a deeply believing man who had been led astray by ambition rather than a lack of faith. Escobar is said to have replied to him, "It is not important to be repentant. I am a believer." He continued to attend Mass, participated in confession, and even claimed to have experienced a vision of Christ. For him, belief and wrongdoing existed side by side, without canceling one another out. Once Pablo Escobar became wealthy, he either built or purchased numerous residences and safe houses throughout Colombia and abroad. Among them, the most famous was Hacienda Nápoles, an expansive estate in the Antioquia countryside. The property included a large colonial-style house, several lakes, a private airport, and a sculpture garden. It also featured an impressive private zoo with animals brought from different continents, including elephants, giraffes, exotic birds, and the now well-known hippopotamuses. Escobar even planned to build a Greek-style citadel near the main estate. Construction began but was never completed, and the abandoned work remained as part of the property's unfinished legacy. Escobar also owned property outside of Colombia. In the United States, he purchased a 6,500 square foot pink mansion located at 5860 North Bay Road in Miami Beach, Florida. Built in 1948 and overlooking Biscayne Bay, the 4-bedroom home was officially registered in Escobar's own name. During the 1980s, the U.S. government seized the property as part of its anti-narcotics operations. Decades later, in 2014, the house was purchased by Christian de Berduar, the owner of the Chicken Kitchen restaurant chain. Before demolishing it, he hired a team of treasure hunters and documentary filmmakers to search the structure for hidden money or evidence left behind by Escobar or his cartel. They discovered unusual holes in the floors and walls and found a safe embedded in marble flooring. However, the safe was stolen from the site before it could be examined. Escobar also owned a large retreat on Isla Grande, the biggest of the Islas del Rosario, a group of coral islands located about 35 kilometers from Cartagena on Colombia's Caribbean coast. This seaside estate included a mansion, guest apartments, open courtyards, a swimming pool, a helicopter landing area, tiled flooring, and reinforced windows. Nearby, there was an additional structure that seemed to have been designed for further expansion, but like many of Escobar's projects, it remained unfinished. Over the years, nature reclaimed much of the property, leaving it partially in ruins, overgrown with vegetation and inhabited by wild animals. Pablo Escobar's life ended on a rooftop in Medellin in 1993, but the traces he left behind did not disappear with him. The cartel he once commanded collapsed, his fortune scattered, his allies imprisoned, and his rivals either captured or dead. Yet the silence that followed was not entirely peaceful. Colombia spent years rebuilding institutions, restoring public trust, and trying to understand how one man had once held such influence over a nation. In Medellin, Escobar is remembered in different ways. Some still speak of the man who built football fields, handed out banknotes, and gave housing to the poor. Others remember the bombings, the assassinated journalists, the frightened judges, and the funerals. Streets where gunfire once echoed now hold cafes, libraries, and schools. But his name remains present, spoken in whispers, printed on t-shirts, written in books, depicted in television series, and prayed to by some as though he were a saint. His family lives quietly under new names, still carrying the consequences of his choices. His estates became museums, theme parks, ruins, or empty shells overtaken by grass and animals. Even his hippos, left behind at Hacienda Nápoles, multiplied and wandered into Colombia's rivers, becoming a strange, living reminder of his excess. Today, Escobar exists not as a person, but as a cautionary figure, a story about how power built on fear does not last, and how a man who wanted everything ended with nothing he could hold. His life is studied, criticized, admired by some, condemned by most, but never entirely forgotten. This is where his biography ends, not with gunfire or glory, but with questions left behind about power, poverty, loyalty, violence, and the cost paid by those who never chose to be part of his war.